Okay, so on this video, I'm going to show you how I use Desmos again to introduce absolute value equations. And if you've watched the ones on how we introduce linear equation, it is very similar. So the first thing I do again is, I put in the basic linear absolute value, and we've talked about what the basic absolute value. They solved absolute value equations, and so they're familiar with just reading this and what it means. But then when we start looking at the graph of it, again, we do leave the basic function there, and then again, just like linear, I have them start adding 1, and we look at what happens if we add 1. And then we can look at what happens if we add 2 and 3. And so they start seeing again that pattern. Okay, well, that plus value again just moves my graph up. And then I do have them start doing predictions. Okay, well, what if I put a 6 there? What would it do? Okay, and then I do have them go the opposite direction. We do a -1 and we look at it and what it does. And a -2 and a -3. Now at this point, sometimes I do go ahead and discuss how that if we had solved this, if we were looking for our x-intercepts and we let y equal 0, and we solve that absolute value, that this in fact is our y-intercepts. And I also introduce that when we're solving absolute values, I kind of throw this in every now and then and say, okay, well, when you're solving this, what you're actually getting is your y-intercepts. And so I'll just kind of graph that out a little bit for them also. Anyway, so then I also have, again, them do predictions. Well, what if I put a 6 there? What would it do? And so they get very comfortable with that kind of thing. And also, hopefully, they can also say that it also gives me the y-intercepts of 6. Okay, so we look at that piece of it. And, of course, we're going to go in now and we're going to insert inside our absolute values and start looking at it. And one of the things that I do is a lot of times when I'm doing the absolute value and we really start talking about this, I do go back to, and I like teaching point slope form. And so I go back to point slope form and said, now remember when we did point slope form that it was y minus y and x minus x. And so we talk about that there's that minus in the formula, that it's the change in the x's and the change in the y. And so then they can start to see why this being a +1 is really in our formula as a -1 on that, and that the fact that 2 negatives is positive. And so then we kind of that kind of helps for them to reinforce that concept there. And again, point slope. So if you don't teach point slope form much, I honestly would suggest that you go back in, because point slope form, in my opinion, helps when you're doing the vertex form of quadratics or absolute value or whatever you happen to be doing. Anyway, then we continue on with that and I might, sometimes I'll just leave that up there, the double -1, and so that they kind of see that. So I apologize for my typing. I broke cracked a bone in my hand, and so I've got a splint, and typing is very hard. So we have +3 again, which would be a -3. And we just kind of continue that again, that pattern as to what's going on. And I really think to me, and this is again my personal opinion, but once I started having the Chromebook and the Desmos apps that my kids have, and being able to them visually see this, that we're not taking tons of time in class during drawing data tables and looking at it that way and so forth. This just picked up the graphing of all the different types of functions so much faster for them to see what was going on. So again, I do continue that, and then just like with the others, with linears, then I do come in and have them put values in the front. So what if that's a 2? What did that do to my graph? What is that for? And again, I relate everything back to our linears equations. And we talk about why it's a plus or minus. So we have both sides of our graph. Then, of course, we do the fractions, talk about what happens there. Then we do go in, and I usually have them sketch all this out on a worksheet, and I probably have attached the worksheet on the site for you to see. We talk about negatives and what that does to our graph. And then, of course, when I get done with all of that, I will give them just problems that are with all of the different pieces to it. And I first tell them, I want you to tell me what it's going to look like. Tell me, did it move it left, right, up, down? Is it wider? Is it steeper? What is it? And then we put it in the computer and check it to see, to make sure their predictions were correct. So I like having that extra step, and they're always having them make their own predictions and see if they're right. So that's kind of how I do absolute value. Again, you could come in here if you want and change values inside here. You can continue to just do any kind of exploration that you would like. And then you could always put in your sliders, as we talked about earlier. And then add in all your different sliders and look to see what happens. So again, that's something, like I said, I don't do a lot of, but it is something that I am going to incorporate more of after we're finished, is doing the sliders. So that is kind of how I do the introduction to absolute value graphing.